Buried deep in the footnotes of old troll posts is a cursed link, one which led millions of oblivious internet users to a simple landing page. Just a black screen, 2 obnoxious clowns, and a button marked Enter. This was Kekma.ga, a bait-and-switch shock site, which, though age-gated, certainly shouldn't be viewed by anyone. It was launched in April 2019 by notorious internet sadist Obok Meatgod, the same gentleman behind womensalliance.xyz, who chose a domain name that blended Kek, or LOL, with MAGA. The site's purpose? To protest the safe and sterile, social media-dominated internet that had spread to browsers. To draw traffic, trolls and morbid pranksters advertised Kekma in bad faith. Bait links were shared on Discord servers, in the comment sections of historical and political YouTube videos, and on subreddits populated with young and naive users, like r/teenagers. Cool new Reddit alternative, they'd say, or underground webcomic, a political discussion board, a meme treasure trove, anything to get a click. Within seconds of entering, unsuspecting users were hauled into one of the most violently offensive experiences the web has ever offered. Even if your volume was set to low, the site would emit a deafeningly loud, sustained screech designed to damage the hearing of headphone users and give a minor heart attack to everyone else. At the same time, their browser window would forcefully switch to full screen mode. What appeared changed often. One of the many central videos was a medical recording of pork tapeworm cysts being squeezed from a human liver. Later, it evolved, or devolved, into a clip of a bloodied man squatting in a bathtub, forcing a large metal object into his urethra. Flashing incessantly behind this central video was a rapid-fire montage of pure depravity. These images also changed often, and included a man whose face had been mauled by a bear, another of a person who held onto a firecracker for too long, photoshopped corpses, dogs being skinned alive at meat markets, and other ambiguous gore. Alt F4ing wasn't an option. Trying to exit the site would only result in a dialog box pop-up, a known JavaScript trick that prevented escape. Kekma.ga spread like wildfire through word of mouth, drawing millions of eyes. And just like with Women's Alliance, Obok defended his creation, stating that he gave every visitor a chance to turn back, and, mostly due to legal concerns, he chose not to include malware. But the site itself was a virus of another kind, not one that infected your system, but your brain. Those most indoctrinated described themselves as the Kekma crew, so-called members of gamer kind who created hateful content targeting women and minorities. Kekma was blacklisted in many countries as a result. The site continuously reincarnated, from Kekma.ga to Kekma.xyz, and finally to Kekma.net. Though it never truly broke through to the mainstream, it didn't need to. It slipped between the cracks and corrupted many a developing mind. Young people, who, if anything, were only drawn in by the warning on the landing page, thinking it was all part of the joke. And then the joke became tricking other youngsters with the same link. Online violence isn't a new phenomenon by any means, but it is certainly becoming more prevalent and being shared more casually. And with so much real-life horror and hate just a click away, children aren't just being exposed to it, they're learning to laugh at it. Just look at the recent epidemic of AI gore on TikTok, where real-life tragedies are being filtered through apps like Runway and given a Minions or Lego paint job. These clips aren't just being made for children, but by them. Thought up and posted by those already desensitized thanks to sites like Kekma. In February 2022, without warning, Kekma.net shut down. According to Obok, Kekma was an experiment, a test to see how far shock could spread online, without ads, without PR, just through links. But it didn't die. Mirrors popped up. Community sites stayed active. By October, Kekma.net was live once again, back by popular demand. Because for some guinea pigs, Obok's experiment had a lasting impact. You've probably never heard of names like Spokio, Truthfinder, or Beam Verified, but they have definitely heard of you. These are data brokers, and their entire business model is harvesting your personal info, your name, your address, your phone number, and selling it to anyone with a credit card. This is what they've got on me, and probably on you too. Pages of eerily specific details, neatly packaged and indexed. It's all for sale, none of it with my permission. These companies make billions selling our privacy, and they don't care if that data ends up in the hands of spammers, scammers, or anyone in between. They don't even ask questions. They're too busy laughing all the way to the bank. It's creepy. It's enraging. And honestly, it makes you feel like your identity is just a line item in some stranger's profit report. And the worst part? For some bizarre reason, what they're doing is considered legal. If our governments won't protect us, then we have to take matters into our own hands. That's why I started using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura finds the site selling your info and sends automatic opt-out requests to get it taken down. No paperwork, no stress, just results. Plus, Aura monitors the dark web, flags suspicious credit card activity, includes a VPN and a password manager, and offers up to $5 million in identity theft insurance with 24/7 US-based support. You can try Aura free for 14 days by clicking the link in the description or by visiting aura.com/lazy and start wiping your name off these sketchy sites right now. A special thanks to Martin H. for bringing this entry to my attention. Between 2017 and 2021, Norwegian-born Marius Gustavsson, a man with zero medical training, operated a secret network of extreme body modification from his basement flat in Haringey, North London. But he wasn't offering tattoos or piercings. Gustavsson's service was far more radical and far more dangerous. What he offered was nullification surgeries. In the underground body mod scene, nullos are people, almost always men, who've had their reproductive organs removed. Most identify as having had their gender nullified, with many opting for a nulloplasty, a completely smooth look down there, akin to an Action Man or G.I. Joe. For some, it's about identity. For others, it's a fantasy or a mental compulsion. But for Gustavsson, it was a business. You see, online, Gustavsson went by a different name: Eunuch Maker. On his website, theem.com, he targeted those with body integrity identification disorder, a rare condition characterized by a persistent and intense desire to have body parts removed, usually because they feel like foreign objects. Specifically, Gustavsson offered to turn people into nullos for low prices. No consultation required, no pesky psychiatrists involved. Acceptance guaranteed. Problem was, BIID is so rare that building a business model on back alley operations alone wasn't going to keep the lights on. But one thing that the internet's never been short of is morbidly curious degenerates. Through his site, Gustavsson set up a pay-per-view service, a red room of sorts, though not one dedicated to snuff. He rigged his flat with cameras and turned it into a black market surgery centre. For an annual subscription of £100, or £35 during the New Year's sale, so-called VIPs could watch Eunuch Maker perform his surgeries live. Through encrypted forums and online groups, Gustavsson recruited volunteers. Young men, one as young as 16, who had fallen deep into the online nullo rabbit hole. He offered to remove any unwanted bits and pieces, free of charge, provided they didn't mind their procedure being live-streamed. Then, for the viewing pleasure of his paying customers, he'd give his victims kitchen table surgeries, amputations, castrations, and penectomies, using makeshift tools like kitchen knives and livestock clamps. Some procedures involve slicing, or even worse, crushing the patient's most sensitive parts. Others included electric shocks, sub-zero freezing, or injection with various chemicals. He even branded his patients with the initials EM using a red-hot iron. To drive engagement, Gustavsson sometimes played a dice game live on stream to decide which body part should be removed next. Given how crude these life-threatening operations were, things inevitably went wrong, usually as a result of blood loss. During one episode, a patient was heard crying, "I don't want to die," while he hemorrhaged. Several patients had to be rushed to hospital to be saved by actual medical professionals, and at least one client lost function in his hands. On the phone to emergency services, Gustafsson would lie, describing how his patients had actually injured themselves. Over the years, the EM website received plenty of traffic, as many as 300,000 visits per day, with 23,000 users signed up for the VIP membership package. Analytics confirmed that this little venture had global appeal. The site had active users in every single country bar one: North Korea. Needless to say, it was a lucrative enterprise. As a side hustle, Gustafsson would pickle the removed body parts and sell them to customers. As one of his IRL friends recalled, "My partner and I were there when a sale went down. He used the money to buy pizza. It wasn't a lot." But not all of the sliced-off appendages were sold. Gustafsson kept some as souvenirs, storing them in jars and displaying them over his bed. He was even known to serve private parts for lunch and film mukbangs for his audience, the occasional sausage platter or a salad with nuts, he joked. This wasn't just a dark niche though. The EM.com had become a kind of cult of mutilation. Gustafsson surrounded himself with acolytes, fans, and partners who helped to spread his influence, and for years, nobody stopped him. He even had his closest followers perform procedures on him. In his words, he had had himself turned into a Ken doll with nothing down there. Additionally, he had his left leg frozen with dry ice. From then on, he had to use a wheelchair and claimed £18,000 in disability benefits from the government. But EM's business would come crashing down in 2021, when one courageous victim approached Devon and Cornwall police with a USB stick. It contained over 5,000 WhatsApp messages, more than 100 images, and multiple videos, all documenting what had been done to him. He described how he had been drugged before the backstreet surgeon began cutting into him with a scalpel. At one point, he said that he was strapped to a bed and electrocuted. A digital viewing team of 6 officers watched over 400 hours of footage to help identify Gustafsson's numerous assistants. After a complex investigation, British authorities arrested 46-year-old Gustafsson and 6 co-conspirators. Charges ranged from grievous bodily harm to the distribution of material involving minors. Prosecutors described Gustafsson as a master manipulator who controlled and exploited vulnerable young men under the guise of being their friend. For his victims, they said, the horror was both physical and psychological. Some of them later admitted to feeling coerced, misled, or even brainwashed into becoming nullos. Others said that they were mesmerized, seeing the calm and confident eunuch maker in the flesh. In response, his defense team played the Joker card, saying that the Norwegian only wanted to put a smile on people's faces, both those he was transforming and those who were watching his live streams. And besides, all of his patients had consented to their procedures. But consenting to extreme body mods isn't a defense in the UK. Aside from tattoos and piercings, pretty much every modification is illegal, or dubiously legal at best. And so, in May 2024, at the Old Bailey in London, Gustafsson was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 22 years. The judge described him as the architect of a deeply disturbing enterprise, one that blurred the line between consent and exploitation, fantasy and irreversible harm. Gustafsson showed no remorse, not for the crimes he had committed, nor for the lasting physical and psychological damage he had inflicted. This story shocked even the darkest corners of the internet. Gustafsson didn't invent the idea of nullification, but he did turn that subculture into something predatory. And even now, remnants of his network remain online. Most towns have their fair share of abandoned buildings, and most of them tell the same old story. Mold, neglect, the slow decay of something that used to matter. If you were to go urban exploring in the rundown remnants of a former school, hospital, or factory, you'd likely find little else other than broken glass, rusty bed frames, discarded stationery, or the occasional mattress. Echoes of life, long since emptied out. But what one Chinese explorer discovered was anything but typical. In February 2022, a Bilibili and Douyin user known as Beanbag Adventure uploaded footage of what appeared to be an abandoned air raid bunker, one supposedly located in Jilin province. At first, the video felt like your standard urbex fare, but as Beanbag ventured further through the upper hallways and rooms, he came across some unsettling items. Empty medical bottles, children's masks, a suitcase containing a high heel, and what appeared to be human bones. As Beanbag described, a distinctive smell of rot permeated the air, and it slowly became more noticeable, more putrid. He followed his nose into the depths of the structure, making his way through claustrophobic concrete tunnels, hoping to find the source of the foul stench. It led him to one particular chamber, a makeshift laboratory with medical bottles and children's clothes on the ground. Through a voiceover, Beanbag warned viewers that they were about to see something that wasn't for the weak of stomach. The camera panned into what looked like a pool or vat. Inside it was a murky liquid and approximately 20 to 25 bloated bodies in various stages of decomposition. Judging by their shape and size, most, if not all of them, were children and toddlers. Beanbag insisted that the bodies were props, hinting that he had to say that for the algorithm. He then repeatedly told viewers to pay attention to the details. After examining the water, he walked off screen and began gagging. At the time, most people took Beanbag's comment that these were movie props at face value, assuming that the video had been staged. As a result, it didn't receive too much attention. But in a second video, filmed on December 26th, 10 months after his first visit, Beanbag returned. This time, the camera lingered on the pool. Eerily, the fluid level was noticeably lower, with most of the bodies now floating on the surface. What convinced many that they were real and not props was that the exposed portions of flesh had noticeably decomposed since the first video, while the submerged areas remained mostly intact. Based on its colour and the context, many assumed the liquid to be formalin, a common preservative made up of 37% formaldehyde. A tarp-like screen had also been partially pulled over the tank, perhaps in an effort to stop the formula from evaporating. And if it wasn't Beanbag who had moved it, that raised a question. Was someone maintaining the site? Monitoring the state of the bodies? If so, for what purpose? Wading through sludge that reached up to his ankles, Beanbag returned for a third visit a few days later, where he discovered jars with what looked like fetuses suspended in liquid. One container held a reassembled human spine. Plastic bags sat nearby, filled with adult bones, some still bearing metal pins and brackets, the kind used in anatomical displays. These 2 December videos set the Chinese internet ablaze. Under Beanbag's videos, a few theorized that the children in the solution had fallen victim to black market organ harvesting, a hugely profitable business in China, a country where, for cultural reasons, organ donors are few and far between, and yet a place where transplants are somehow readily available for wealthy tourists and the elite. These children, they said, had no doubt been abducted for their valuable insides. At some point between February and December, their killers had returned to the facility, deemed the half-preserved specimens unsalvageable, and abandoned the operation. Thing is, covering a body in formaldehyde renders the internal organs unusable, so why keep them in a formalin bath to begin with? Well, some of the remains seemed to be missing their eyes, and showed signs of having been cut open, so it's possible that they had been placed in the solution after having already been harvested. With that in mind, many netizens reached the same chilling conclusion: that this was a corpse farm. As detailed by user Cone Report on the r/no-rules subreddit, in China there's a significant market, often opaque, for preserved human specimens, those used for medical training, university research, and museum exhibits. Though it sounds niche, the economics suggest otherwise. As mentioned in my eCuerpos coverage, a single cadaver, properly processed, can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Globally, the industry is worth millions, and China is the world leader in exports, with private and state-run facilities processing bodies on an industrial scale. one of the most infamous facilities was established south of Jilin in the early 2000s, namely Von Hagen's Dalian Plastination Co. Limited. The founder, German anatomist Gunther von Hagens, pioneered a process called plastination, which preserves fresh bodies by replacing fluids and fat with plastic polymers. Said bodies can then be turned into artworks. You're no doubt familiar with the exhibition Body Walls, which tours globally, attracts millions of visitors, and is featured in movies like Casino Royale. That's von Hagen's work. Since its inception, the venture has generated hundreds of millions in profits, but controversy has always followed his work. Von Hagens has openly admitted that he hasn't always been sure where his specimens came from, and that many were simply fresh, unclaimed bodies from China. In one documented case, he returned 7 models to Chinese suppliers after learning that the bodies may have come from executed prisoners. Around that same time, China launched a sweeping crackdown on Falun Gong, a spiritual movement with as many as 70 million followers. For those Falun Gong members who were unable to escape China, the consequences were severe. Many were forced underground, or detained, or sent to re-education and labour camps. Others were tortured, or disappeared entirely. Among the victims were Yun Zhang and her husband, Song Tao. In 1999, Song was sent to a labour camp without trial, targeted simply for his beliefs. Guards tortured him with electric batons, trying to force a renunciation of his faith. He died under their hands. Yun was given an urn, supposedly containing his ashes, but he had been cremated before she could even identify him. 2 years later, in 2001, Yun herself disappeared at the age of 29. As of 2025, her fate remains unknown. The Falun Gong purge continues to this day. In 2022 alone, the same year Beanbag uploaded his video, an estimated 172 Falun Gong members were executed, many without a trial. Human rights groups have since raised concerns that some of the bodies used in plastination, or anatomical exports more generally, may have come from Falun Gong prisoners. Further suspicion was fueled by von Hagen's reported ties to Bo Xilai, the mayor of Dalian, who allegedly helped support the facility by providing von Hagen with the bodies of Falun Gong members and the victims of organ trafficking. Bo's wife, Gu Kailei, was later convicted of murder and corruption, adding more fuel to online speculation. One rumour in particular refuses to die. In the late 1990s, Bo Xilai was rumoured to have had an affair with local celebrity Zhang Weiji. After becoming pregnant, Zhang decided to go public with the news. Days later, she vanished. Subsequently, a plastinated model appeared in one of von Hagen's exhibits, one of a pregnant woman, dramatically posed, one hand on her head. The resemblance to Zhang sparked rumours. Some claimed the body was Zhang. No DNA test was ever performed, and eventually, the fleshy statue was quietly removed. In Cone Report's mind, the figure's hand was oriented like that to hide the bullet hole in the back of her head. Von Hagen's legal team denied those allegations, and today, the company insists it no longer sources human remains from China. But even with von Hagen's factory gone, many clandestine processing facilities do continue to operate in Jilin and Dalian to this day, exporting bodies to similar exhibits around the globe. The question is, in a country where organ and body donation is a cultural taboo, are there really so many willing volunteer donors that they need numerous cadaver processing plants concentrated in the same area? For obvious reasons, many believe that there's something shady going on. This has led to people debating if the victims in the beanbag uploads were the children of purged Falun Gong members, if they were acquired from orphanages, hospitals, or kidnapping rings, and if their own government had a hand in what was happening. Now here's where caution comes in. Despite the viral reaction to Beanbag Adventure's second and third videos, no independent verification has confirmed what he filmed. There have been no official investigations, no forensic follow-up, and no third-party analysis of the site. While the footage appears extremely convincing, and the bodies graphically realistic, it's possible it was staged, either as an elaborate hoax, an art project, or a social commentary piece. The idea of corpse farms, while real, has also been a favourite trope in Chinese horror media. So without clearer proof, the claim that this bunker was part of an illegal body processing network remains speculative. Even so, the imagery stuck, and the context, the very real history of unethical body sourcing in China, gives the videos weight. As for Beanbag Adventure, after posting the footage, his account was banned, and he vanished from social media for nearly 2 months. When his account was reinstated, he continued posting Urbex content as if nothing had happened, deleted the bunker videos, and never mentioned or referenced them again. Was it all a hoax? Or had he been warned to never speak of his discovery, lest he end up on the body market himself? We may never know for sure, but if the so-called props were real, 3 questions still linger. Who were these children? Who put them in the formalin bath? And are they still floating there as we speak? In the 1990s, cruise ships promised luxury, freedom, and tropical escape. But behind the glossy brochures and smiling star photos was a different reality. One of lax security, minimal oversight, and jurisdictional loopholes that left passengers shockingly vulnerable. Surveillance was limited, background checks were loose, and once you were at sea, you were at the mercy of the ship's own internal systems, not the laws of any single country. It was the perfect setting for someone to vanish without a trace, and in 1998, that's exactly what happened to 23-year-old Amy Lynn Bradley. At the time, Amy lived just outside of Richmond, Virginia, with her parents, Ivor and Ron, and her brother, Brad. By pure luck, her parents had won a pair of cruise tickets through a sweepstake at Ron's company, and being generous, they offered to pay for Amy and Brad to join them on the trip of a lifetime. Amy was initially hesitant. Although she loved swimming, she had a mild phobia of the open ocean. She also had a fear of heights, and the upper deck of the cruise ship was 105 feet above the waterline. However, when her brother Brad accepted their offer, so did Amy. The siblings were close, and in spite of her phobias, she saw it as a good opportunity to enjoy a week of sun, sightseeing, and family bonding. On March 21st, the Bradleys boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas, an 11-deck cruise liner operated by Royal Caribbean, bound for the island of Curaçao. On the morning of March 23rd, the ship docked in Aruba. Amy and her relatives spent the day exploring the island. That evening, the Bradleys all got dressed up for dinner, where the ship's photographer took pictures of them in their formal wear. Amy drew a lot of attention during dinner, not just from other passengers, but also from crew members. Several waiters had suggested taking her to Carlos and Charlie's while they were docked in Aruba, incidentally, the same venue where Natalie Holloway would disappear 7 years later. Amy turned down their offers, telling her dad that they gave her the creeps. In fact, Amy expressed repeated discomfort throughout those first days of the cruise, telling her family that she felt uneasy around certain crew members and didn't want to leave the ship unaccompanied. After dinner, the Bradleys changed back into their casual clothes. While Amy and Brad went to the onboard casino, their mother went to buy their formal photos, only to notice that all of the pictures of Amy were gone. The photographer recalled printing the images, though was unsure who had removed them. He reprinted them for Ivor, who assumed there must have been some sort of mix-up. Later, Amy and Brad headed to the Viking Lounge, a nightclub on the 9th floor deck. They danced, had a few drinks, and returned to their cabin at around 3:35 AM on the 24th. The two stayed up, talking on their balcony, discussing their upcoming plans for Curaçao. Eventually, Brad went to bed, leaving Amy alone outside. At 5:30 AM, their father, Ron Bradley, briefly awoke and looked out the window. Amy was still out on the balcony, asleep on a lounge chair. "I could see Amy's legs from her hips down," he would later report. "I dozed back off to sleep. The balcony door was closed. I would have got up and closed it otherwise." But when Ron awoke again at 6 AM, that same balcony door had been half opened, and Amy was gone. Her shoes, ID, and belongings were still in the cabin. In that 30-minute window, she had seemingly evaporated, but her cigarettes were gone, and there was evidence that she had changed her clothes. Walking off in the early hours was completely unlike Amy. Her father knew that she would have at least left a note. Thus, after spending half an hour searching the upper decks for Amy, Ron began to panic. The ship had just docked in Curaçao, and early birds were already preparing to disembark. At 6:30 AM, he alerted the crew and urged them to lock down the ship. "Don't let anyone off this boat," he told them. "Someone has my daughter." His request for an announcement to be made over the intercom was rejected, and the captain intentionally delayed a vessel-wide search as he didn't want to cause alarm and kill the Calypso atmosphere. Shortly thereafter, the gangway was lowered, and most of the ship's 2,000 passengers disembarked for the day. If Amy had been taken, this moment would have given someone the perfect window to smuggle her off. At 7:50 AM, when the majority of passengers were already on the island, the crew finally made a single, quiet announcement. "Will Amy Bradley please come to the purser's desk?" She never did. Some crew members believed that Amy must have fallen overboard. Perhaps after waking up on the balcony, she had stumbled up and over the railing. That seemed to be the simplest explanation. But the Bradleys dismissed that theory quickly. Not only were the railings very high, and Amy very short, but she was also a former lifeguard and a strong swimmer. What's more, they were near the shore. Add to that her fear of heights and the open ocean, and her family were certain that she wouldn't have willingly gone near the railing. When others suggested that she may have already disembarked the vessel that morning, the Bradleys stated that she had no reason to disappear. Instead, they believed that someone on board knew what happened to her, and so did several other passengers. When news of the incident spread, 2 witnesses came forward, claiming to have seen Amy at 5:45 AM taking a glass elevator to the top deck, supposedly in the company of a Royal Caribbean employee. That employee was later identified as Alistair Yellow Douglas, bass player for the ship's band, Blue Orchid. A third witness claimed to have seen Amy in yellow at 6 AM, just before the ship docked at Curaçao. "I saw Amy and the band member walk over and up to the next deck above us," alleged the witness. "He handed her a dark-coloured drink, maybe coffee. About 10 minutes later, he came walking around by himself." These tips set off alarm bells in Brad's head. Before Amy's disappearance had been publicly announced, Yellow had approached him and said, "I'm sorry to hear about your sister." When an editor on board named Chris Fenwick heard about Amy's disappearance, he checked video footage taken at the Viking Lounge the night prior. Eerily, his cameraman had inadvertently captured these shots of Amy dancing with a bald-headed man. One Alistair Yellow Douglas. Curiously, Chris would later receive a call from the ship's head of security, one Lou Costello, and was told that he would need to hand over the master tapes. Chris refused to give them up, fearing that the cruise company wanted to erase as much evidence as possible to protect their image. As if to confirm his suspicion, Royal Caribbean lawyered up almost immediately and shut down all communication with the Bradley family. The company was no stranger to controversies, with their ships having been the setting of multiple SAs and deaths in the past. After being identified as a possible suspect, Yellow was questioned by the FBI on March 25th. He admitted to dancing with Amy at the nightclub and claimed that they parted ways at about 1 AM. Apparently, he took the staff elevator and she walked off in the opposite direction. He said he didn't see her again after that. His polygraph test results were deemed inconclusive, so basically how all polygraph results should be viewed anyway, and due to a lack of evidence, he was allowed to walk. According to Amy's father, Yellow left that interview with a big smile on his face, flashing a thumbs up to his bandmates. Meanwhile, search dogs brought on board traced Amy's scent to the gangway, the exit used by passengers to leave the ship. That single clue backed the family's worst fear, that Amy may have been taken ashore against her will. The Bradleys stayed behind in Curaçao as authorities launched a 4-day search of the surrounding islands and waters. Unfortunately, no trace of Amy was found anywhere. When they learned that the initial search of the ship hadn't been thorough, the Bradleys reboarded and ensured that every nook and cranny was checked. Again, there was no sign of their missing daughter. Amy's devastated loved ones were forced to catch a flight home without her. It began to seem as if she really had fallen into the ocean. But then came the sightings. The first occurred 5 months after Amy disappeared, when 2 Canadian tourists reported seeing a distressed woman on a Curacao beach being escorted by 2 aggressive men. It was clear that she wanted to get their attention. "The second she heard me speaking English, she sped up," recalled one of the tourists. "She was trying to get away from them. I was 2 feet away." But before the woman could open her mouth, the 2 men ushered her away. The tourist described the woman's tattoos: a gecko on her stomach, a Tasmanian devil on her shoulder, a symbol on her ankle, and a rising sun on her back. All 4 matched Amy's. Even more chilling, they said that one of the men flanking Amy looked exactly like Alistair Yellow Douglas. Authorities returned to the island to investigate, but once again, they found nothing. A year later, in 1999, a petty officer serving in the US Navy entered a Curacao brothel. While drinking in the bar area, a woman approached him and said that her name was Amy Bradley. She begged him for help, saying that she was being held there against her will. Initially, the officer didn't report the incident, fearing disciplinary action for being in an unauthorized area. Instead, he simply told the woman where his ship was docked. 2 men then arrived and ordered her upstairs. The officer came forward with this information in 2002, after he had retired of course, when he saw a photo of that same woman in a magazine discussing Amy Bradley's disappearance. By the time his tip reached the authorities, the building had already burned down. Any potential records were gone. In late 1999, the Bradley family received yet another glimmer of hope from a man named Frank Jones. He claimed to be a former Navy SEAL in command of an elite team of mercenaries. According to him, she was being held inside a heavily guarded compound. Frank sent them photos of a woman bearing Amy's tattoos, convincing the Bradleys that his intel was sound. For months, Frank kept feeding them updates: sightings, movements, plans for a daring rescue. But there was a catch. He needed money. With the help of the National Missing Children's Organization, the Bradleys wired him over $200,000 to fund the operation. They waited for the call that Amy had been freed, but it never came. Frank Jones was a con artist, not a soldier. He had fabricated the whole story and staged the photos using an actress. In 2002, Frank was charged with defrauding the Bradleys. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 5 years. In 2005, another witness spotted a woman in a department store bathroom in Barbados, visibly distressed and accompanied by 3 men. The witness reported hearing the males threaten her, telling her she had to go through with the deal before stepping outside of the restroom. Seizing the moment, the witness approached the woman and asked if she was okay. The woman, shaken and scared, whispered, "My name's Amy. I'm from Virginia." But before the witness could react, the men burst back in and led the woman away. These sketches were drawn up based on the witness's description of the suspects. AI Witness Report have since released these enhanced composites. So far, these sightings could be chalked up to cases of mistaken identity or more fraudsters after reward money. After all, the FBI was offering a $25,000 reward for information that helped to bring an end to the investigation, while the Bradley family were offering a substantial $250,000 reward of their own. But here's where things become an internet mystery. In 2005, photographs of a woman resembling an older Amy, tired, gaunt, and frightened, surfaced online. The images had originally been posted on a now-defunct website advertising adult holidays in the Caribbean. Her name was listed as Jazz. An independent forensic expert examined the photos and concluded that they were a near-perfect match for Amy. In his opinion, the facial structure, hairline, and piercings lined up completely. These pictures have since fueled online discussion and led many to believe that Amy was smuggled off the cruise liner and enslaved by a human trafficking ring. On March 24, 2010, exactly 12 years after her disappearance, Amy Lynn Bradley was declared legally dead. That's despite no body ever being found. Some believe Alistair Yellow Douglas was behind her vanishing. Perhaps he had pushed her into the ocean after she rejected his advances. Others suspect that she was smuggled off the ship by multiple crew members. But perhaps the simplest answer is the most likely, that these photos, and all the supposed sightings, are nothing more than red herrings, and that Amy truly did fall from the balcony. After all, middle-class white women from happy homes are far from your typical trafficking victims, especially when they're surrounded by their loving family, who will immediately begin searching for them, and when the operation involves smuggling them away in broad daylight. Such monsters typically target the disadvantaged, the isolated, and the vulnerable. According to her family, Amy was planning to enter a photography contest. Could it be that she stood on the small drinks table that was on the balcony to get a good shot of the sunrise over Curaçao, only to fall overboard in the process? Regardless of her swimming ability, falling into the water from a great height would be like hitting concrete. They say it's the not knowing that's the hardest. And today, almost 3 decades since their beloved Amy vanished, the Bradley family are still searching for answers. A huge thank you to my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters: Holly Lyons, Thomas Almond, Alana Pons, Asiamina, Alicia 1996V, Azrael Warakai, Aðalsteinn Traustason, Colin Monsma, Connor Louthan, Emzetz, Farewelltattoosjaxfl, George Lopez, Gina Valera, Gracearchie, Hamish, John Stuart Muller, Lucy Kushinada, Michelle F. Granfield, Mistyblue Longie, Orlando Torres, Peter Lulgjuraj, DNS Mum, Terry Ford, and Yokai. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. Remember to hit that like button, and I'll see you all again very soon.